Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Atkinson, Managing Editor at Supply Chain Brain. I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today, presented by J.M. Rogers, the title for which is Turning Tariffs into Profit, Winning with Duty Drawback. We're going to kick off with a presentation from J.M. Rogers, then we're going to move into a panel session. Later in the webinar, we're going to open up for a Q&A session with questions from you, the audience. We will not be using people's titles or company names, so go ahead and ask anything you like. If you don't see your question come up during the webinar, please be assured J.M. Rogers will reach out to you offline. So what are we talking about today? Tariffs are in the news, and it's hard to keep track of what's going on with tariffs. Today, we'll get an up-to-the-minute briefing on the tariff environment, highlighting what's happening now, what's on the horizon, and how it all connects to duty drawback opportunities. We'll close with a tactical breakdown of what companies can do to get started with duty drawback, from collecting the right data to preparing documentation and aligning internal teams. All in all, we're confident you'll leave with a clear checklist of actions your team can implement immediately to evaluate eligibility and begin capturing refunds. Right, without delay, let's meet our presenter. Andrew Galloway is Senior Vice President at J.M. Rogers Co. With over 25 years in sales and 18 years in international logistics, Andrew leads sales and marketing and oversees global operations in Hong Kong and Shanghai. He plays a pivotal role in advancing key initiatives in customs, brokerage, and duty drawback at JMR. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Helen. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you perhaps on the West Coast. I want to start off by giving everyone just a quick snapshot of the timeline of drawback, because many people may not realize this, but drawback has actually been around for over 235 years. It was the very second law passed by Congress in 1789. And really, the spirit of the law was created to promote U.S. manufacturing and exports. So this slide really isn't designed to walk you through each specific law change, but more to show how long drawback has been here and that it's really here to stay. And I think when you look at this timeline shows more of the key policy shifts that have affected drawback. Most noticeable when it comes to drawback that have been affected are NAFTA in 1994. There were drawback provisions that went in there or exclusions on certain things with drawback within that agreement and affected it tremendously. You moved to TEFTA in 2015. That law change had a big change in drawback, especially with your unused substitution in manufacturing. And then we get into the 2018 tariffs when the Trump's first administration went into effect, and then ACE filings. And now we have, as we all know, as Helen mentioned, tariffs are in the news, right? Reciprocal tariffs in 2025. So drawback has been able to adapt time and trade policy changes for negative or worse, but it's here. So the real takeaway, I think, is U.S. trade policy has a profound effect on importers and exporters, from NAFTA to TEFTA to today's reciprocal tariffs, directly shaping how we all do business and our ability to recover duties and tariffs through drawback. And that leads me directly into the next slide, which is the pending Supreme Court case. Excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. Technical glitch there. I apologize. So the pending court case for IEEPA, the Supreme Court case we're talking about goes straight to the heart of U.S. trade policy and how tariffs are being imposed. So here's what's basically happening. And many of you have probably been hearing a lot of this on the news, but basically what's happening is President Trump and the senior administration officials are being sued over the tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's a mouthful. We call them IEPA for short. So I'm sure everyone's heard of the IEPA tariffs. That's what's in question here. The lawsuits were filed initially with the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York, the CIT, and it moved into the federal court at the U.S. District in D.C., and now it's been elevated to the Supreme Court. Okay. The plaintiffs are basically arguing that the administration improperly used IEPA tariffs and imposed these tariffs based on national emergency declarations for drug trafficking, migration, and trade deficits. So, in short, they're saying the president overstepped his authority in utilizing IEPA to levy these tariffs. So, what are the tariffs at issue? The tariffs specifically within IEPA are your fentanyl tariffs, as many of them refer them to, which is that 20% that was imposed on China back in February of this year. Mexico and Canada followed in March with 20% as well. And then in April, that broader stretch of reciprocal tariffs imposed on all countries with that baseline 10%. And of course, we know some countries are much higher than 10%, but almost all imports, unless there's some sort of exclusion that gets you out of that, are seeing at least this baseline 10%. So just remember, this court case does not include Section 301 tariffs, which are the tariffs that Trump put in place under his first administration. Or this does not include Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum or auto tariffs. Those are completely separate, not part of this. So far, the plaintiffs have won twice in the lower courts. Both the CIT and the federal court in DC sided with the plaintiffs, which each lost. The Trump administration quickly appealed, and it continued to accelerate this. And now here we are, it's in the Supreme Court. And they decided to take the case, and we're setting the stage for kind of the final showdown, if you will, in the highest court. So once the Supreme Court accepted the case, they're now putting the case on an expedited path. So oral arguments are scheduled for the first week of November of this year, 2025. And then the Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court for a potential decision by the end of this calendar year. Now, that's extremely fast for a case of this size. And many people before the Trump administration announced that expedited process believed that a decision would probably come somewhere in June of 2026. So we'll see. What they say and what they do can be two different things, as we all know, right? I think the impact of this decision, though, is going to be huge, which regardless of which way the court rules, the decision will directly affect every importer. And the real key will be understanding how to position yourself to recover duties through mechanisms like duty drawback, or perhaps post-summary corrections and protests, or really a combination of the two. So moving on, let's take a look at these two very different futures and what it might mean, whether the court rules one way or the other. And I think you kind of have to look at each possible outcome quickly and kind of what does it mean in practice, right? So if the Supreme Court agrees with the lower courts, okay, and the plaintiffs win, you're gonna see the IEPA tariffs stop immediately. Okay, I think everybody's hoping that happens, that are paying these tariffs. Most importers don't really want to deal with these tariffs. But I will say this is going to lead to a potential massive refund to pay back the importers on tariffs that have been paid thus far. Some of these trade statistics have stated that the government has collected around $180 billion year to date for just the IEPA tariffs, which means by the end of this calendar year, that number will probably be well over 300 billion, if not close. And if a decision did come maybe in June of 2026, we could be looking at well over 500 billion. I've seen some articles inflate those numbers to 750 billion to $1 trillion in refunds. Regardless of the number, if found illegal, I think there's going to be some likely chaos to ensue, because most likely the mechanism for importers to recoup those funds are going to be through a post-summary correction or a protest process. And I'll touch on that in a second. If the Supreme Court rules that the Trump administration was within their rights and they win, okay, the tariffs are going to stay in place. They're going to be validated. There's not going to be any refunds process to go through. And importers are going to have to figure out and mitigate the costs elsewhere. So I think for exporters, drawback programs are going to surge. They're going to be in demand as they are right now. And importers will also, not every importer obviously is exporting everything. So on other cases, you're going to have to strategically do some strategic planning through supply chain adjustments, maybe some alternative sourcing, pricing, how to absorb costs, pass along costs, things of that nature. Still dealing with a lot of the stuff you're really dealing with right now, right? Let's face it. So, but I think long-term, duty drawback is going to remain as one of those few cost reduction tools that's going to be available. And just coming back, just to think about this, I want everyone to put this in perspective. Think about it for 1 second. If the tariffs are struck down, every importer in the country is going to be filing post-summary corrections on every IEPA entry done prior to the court ruling. And as many of you probably know, every brokerage house runs with lean operations. So we're dealing with a system not built really to handle this kind of volume, both from a brokerage or a service provider, a customs broker, and also customs. So I think if the case goes against Trump, I think we're in for a real challenging time. And I guess if he wins it too, it's still going to be challenging for people to deal with it. So we're going to be dealing with a lot, even if these tariffs go away. So I think it's going to create big changes, and you need to prepare now and not wait. So win or lose, let's talk about that. What's a practical approach for importers? Okay. So even with the lower court's decision, the Supreme Court is really probably unpredictable, because a lot of times I think you see the Supreme Court maybe mirror what the lower courts do. I think a lot of people are hoping for that, right? But you have to keep in mind, of the 9 Supreme Court members, 3 were appointed by Trump. 3 more are Republican appointed judges. And then you have 3 more appointed Democrat judges. So he has the court kind of in his favor in that sense. So we kind of laid out some practical action items for you today, right? So we can kind of be a little bit more proactive than reactive to the situation. So the first thing we recommend you look to do is try to extend your liquidation dates on your entries that are affected by the IEPA tariffs. What this does is it buys you more time to file post-summary corrections and protests if refunds become available to you. Remember, it's going to be very chaotic, and you only have a certain amount of time to file post-summary corrections and protests. So this gives you a larger window to operate, and it's a really smart first step. You can liquidate up to another year. So that really helps you. It's going to take a while to get the refunds anyway. So you might as well make sure that you're giving yourself the biggest opportunity to get it back. Second, if you're exporting, implement a drawback program right away. Or if you already have a drawback program, continue to find ways to make sure you're maximizing your drawback potential as it is right now. Drawback applies to more than just IEPA tariffs, so you can start recovering duties now and kind of hedge your bet against these future tariffs as well. If Trump loses, you'll already be positioned to file refund claims through drawback, And if he wins, you're protected by an active drawback program. And you can do both. You can do it both ways. So starting a drawback program today allows you, again, to act versus react to this decision. It gives you a head start on refunds. A drawback provider like us, we can show you exactly what entries were used within the framework of a drawback claim, so you can still remain compliant when you go back and potentially have to do post-summary corrections or protests if these IEPA tariffs are eligible for that. So overall, extend those liquidation date windows, implement a drawback program, you'll be ready which way the court decides. So building a drawback support system, all right? This is important because I'm going to try to take you through and make you understand how to get there, because drawback is not always easy. I always try to tell people, first thing we always want to do is we want to identify the type of drawback you qualify for. It seems relatively straightforward, but there's a lot of nuances that go along with it. And if you're not educated on drawback, it can be confusing. There are, of course, many types of drawback provisions within the regulations, but most companies really fall under what we call the big three. You have your unused direct ID and unused substitution drawback. So that's all your same condition product coming in. Nothing happens to it. It comes in the same one condition and leaves in the same condition. Or you have manufacturing substitution drawback. Products, components, parts, raw materials coming in, going through a manufacturing process, subsequently gets exported out of the country. There's your manufacturing substitution. I think it's very important to note, though, you could have two similar companies in the same industry that qualify for the same type of drawback, but every account is unique. Each drawback program needs to be tailored to your company's needs, the products you're bringing in, the data flows, your export patterns. Everything is always a little bit different. So there's very much a customization process involved with this. We haven't met many accounts that are exactly the same. Two, you want to ensure you support drawback from a data and documentation perspective. So once you understand the type of drawback you qualify for, now we can focus on collecting the right supporting data and helping you maintain the right documentation through record keeping, because that's the backbone of your program. If customs ever comes knocking at your door, they're not going to want to see data. They want to see the documentation that supports the data. And not all data is the same for each type of drawback. So we got to understand the type, then we can guide you on the data and documentation and build the process internally. And I always like to throw this in here because I think this is so important, because taking a methodical approach to your program is really a best practice, in my opinion. I've seen a lot of other competitors out there. They rush to give you a quote, or you throw a number out there and someone says, we'll do it for this percentage and here's a contract. Take the methodical approach. It helps you understand what's required from a data and documentation perspective. It will give you a ballpark idea of the potential once you start looking at that information. It will help you understand the resources you need to support drawback. So important. And it avoid surprises months down the road. Look, the last thing you want is to implement a program and then find out 5-6 months later you don't have the potential or you can't support it and it just falls apart. What a waste of time that is. So take your time, understand everything, and understand that supply chain. Make sure you understand the type of drawback you qualify for. Confirm you can support it with strong data and documentation, and take that methodical approach to prove that you can support it. And then you initiate that program. That will help you create a strong foundation for drawback. Next, analyzing your drawback potential. All right, we want to make sure that you qualify. I think a couple of things are, as I mentioned before, or maybe I did, the fentanyl tariffs under IEPA, they're not eligible for duty drawback. Section 232 tariffs, which are not part of the Supreme Court case, steel, aluminum, auto tariffs, those are also not eligible for duty drawback. Your regular ad valorem duty, your reciprocal tariffs, your 301 tariffs, if you're paying them from China, those are all eligible. So understanding what, if you're a steel importer and all you're paying is Section 232, drawback's probably not going to be for you. So understanding and analyzing where the potential is important. Understand the start point, right? Because some companies have only been impacted by since April. Other companies might be able to go back 5 years. You can go back 5 years on imports and exports within the customs regs to, as we call it, retroactively with a cleanup. Some companies might be able to go back, but they just didn't have the data and the documentation processes in place, right? So they may say, well, I can't go back. Let's figure out where we're going to start. This is where I know I changed ERP systems and my data is clean. So determining a start point is important. And then with every evaluation, I think this is also important because many people are trying to get to that number. And when you start talking about drawback and getting money back to upper level executives, you have people asking, how much money am I getting back and when, right? So many people are trying to get to that number very quickly. Understand it's not always a straight duty paid by the percentage exported. There's many factors that can push a program up or down in the refund potential, not just with faulty data and information, but you look at unused direct ID. We're working on matching at a product level. We're dealing with inventory turns. A lot of these factors can sway a drawback program in a negative way. So getting a number and maybe being smart about how you report that up is important, right? Under manufacturing, we have to deal with waste, and there could be a lot of factors that go into devaluing a drawback program. So we don't really know actually how much you're worth until we actually build a claim. So a lot of it's always estimates in the beginning. I think it's very good to be transparent about drawback programs as you're starting to initiate them within your organization. And then finally, looking at when is it worth pursuing a drawback program? Our general threshold is around $200,000 a year in refunds. Now, that's not a hard line in the sand, but more of a benchmark because there's a lot of work involved on both sides, on your side, on our side, or your drawback provider's side. And we want to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze. We don't want to be chasing $50,000, $60,000. It becomes very difficult, and you are probably better off utilizing your time elsewhere. So analyzing your program will help you kind of determine how to get started, right? And if it's worth it. So I put together, and I guess you could call them case studies, but case studies would probably be here much longer than the time that we're permitted. So I think I just want to kind of talk about some of the things that we're seeing right now since these tariffs have come into play. And a lot of customers are falling into these categories, and we call them case study 1, 2, 3, but just kind of talk about it to raise some awareness. We have a lot of customers who have imported products in the past prior to the tariffs, and they weren't paying a whole lot of duty. They're exporting, but there's just like, drawback isn't worth it. Now, all of a sudden, these reciprocal tariffs have vaulted. You got a company who might have been paying 2% in duty, and now all of a sudden they're paying 15% from the EU, and now they're paying 17% in duty. Well, that kind of sharp increase in tariffs, and if your export volume is staying the same, you're seeing a lot of drawback potential. So we're unlocking a lot of potential with customers like that. Then we have the customers who it was never worth it. They never even thought about drawback. They don't know the first thing about drawback, and because they never had to, and they were paying duty-free product. I'm seeing a lot of customers within exporting or manufacturing, who have really large export sales, but all their products were duty-free prior to this. And now they're in this position where they're going from a never having potential for drawback to millions of dollars a year in refunds. We are seeing a tremendous amount. So manufacturing companies have been big since the reciprocal tariffs came into play. And then I think we're starting to see a lot of these companies that are more and more being proactive, implementing things before the court decision, right? They're acting now for two reasons. They might have some historical refunds that were not tied to this case that they probably wouldn't go back and get before because it wasn't worth it. But hey, if they can go back and get 3, 4, 500,000 and implement this and protect themselves and hedge their bet, why not do it? So we're seeing some of that play into the decision making. And then overall, as I mentioned before, they're hedging their bet because, quite frankly, they don't think that that Trump is going to lose. They think because of the way the court is packed that the tariffs are here to stay. So why not just implement it? I'm not going to wait. I can always go back and capture the post-summary corrections on the items that I didn't claim during drawback and get the best of both worlds. So don't wait. Start capturing what's available now and hedge against the future. Also, one little thing I want to put out there for the audience. If Trump loses, will that be the end of tariffs? Or will he find another way to impose tariffs? He's already talked about other ways he would implement tariffs if he loses. So I'm willing to bet that President Trump will probably find another way to implement tariffs if he loses. So tariffs aren't over just because of this court case, in my humble opinion. Okay, so, I think kind of in conclusion here with these last few slides, I wanted to talk about a little about making drawback work for you, because drawback is not a loophole. It's your money. This government program, as I mentioned before, it was created 235 years ago, and the spirit of the law was to promote manufacturing in the US and international sales. Yet here we are, even before the tariffs, billions going unclaimed each year. Now, maybe it's because a lot of small companies just don't qualify and it's too much work, fine. But I have to think that a lot of it has to do with just not understanding how to implement it and understanding the right guidance to get there. So I'm hoping that these last few slides show you how to move from opportunity to execution. Okay, so looking at why this is a great opportunity. These duties you've already paid. The tariffs and trade rules keep shifting, but drawback is your hedge against this uncertainty. So doing nothing, honestly, to me, it means leaving money on the table. So this is your chance to kind of look at your internal operations and reclaim those dollars, try to strengthen your margins when applicable. Okay. The requirements, all right? What do you need here to succeed? To succeed, you need clarity, you need preparation, you need guidance. You have to identify the type of drawback that fits your supply chain. Map your imports and exports. Gather clean, audit-ready data. You also need to know which tariffs are eligible and which aren't. So you're really, again, building that solid foundation. Oop, I apologize. I did that twice and I apologize. So the execution turns into potential cash flow. So this is big. Assigning internal champions who can coordinate, whether it be in the finance side, logistics side, compliance side, IT data, those that are dealing with the record keeping within your organization. Maybe if it's even part of how I'm not the exporter of record, how can I make sure I am the EOR or getting the documents I need to support drawback? So building that internal process to ensure you have compliance and everything that you're ready to do, not just for drawback, but for also understanding post-summary corrections and protests. Combine the technology that you have internally with your human expertise. Build the robust systems and the data and get the professionals involved, whether it be through provider or internal, to help you understand it and validate it. to get it right. So you're doing it by the book. Most drawback providers like us, we don't get paid till you get paid. So there's a vested interest to make sure you're compliant. And in closing, if you do these three things, you understand the opportunity, you meet the requirements, and you execute it with consistency, you'll have a drawback program that delivers refunds year after year, no matter what the trade policy is thrown at us.
Thank you, Andrew. That was such an interesting, clear view of the range of possible outcomes and the importance of duty drawback. Let's move into our panel discussion and dig a little further into this very important, very current topic. So I'm curious to know, how can companies better integrate their supply chain data to maximize eligibility for drawback?
Well, that's a good question. I think when you look at supply chain data, one thing I would do initially, if you qualify for drawback, is really making sure you understand the data elements that are required, right? And for that specific type of drawback. And then it really comes down to, where is this data being captured? There can be some complexities with certain types of drawback, obviously. Some can be a little bit easier found than others. But I think it starts with understanding the type of drawback first, and then what data elements are required, right? And then implementing a process to capture that data. Oftentimes, I see customers throw up their hands and quit because when they try to go back retroactively, they can't support drawback because they're like, this is too complicated. You have to come at it with a glass half full mentality, right? Okay, well, maybe I can't go back, but let's implement something moving forward, because think about it. You're not going to just stop international sales because you can't do drawback. So get with a provider that can really show you what is required, and then they can help guide you in figuring out where that's captured within the supply chain. But there's so many different moving parts that it has to be taken on a case by case.
Got it. So, would you be able to give a couple of examples of the sort of data that you're trying to capture and get in good shape?
Yeah, if you look at unused direct identification drawback, when you do direct ID, because of the way the regulations are written, we have to match at a product level. And most customers aren't bringing things in on a serial or a lot level basis where each unit or piece that they bring in has a unique identifier. They're bringing things in on a part level or a SKU level basis, right? So when you do that, customs forces us to use accounting methods. When you use accounting methods, it's always done by the part level. And a lot of times that's not being captured at the time of entry. So how can you, as an organization, ensure that you're able to tie the part number back to the entry line number and get that in a good, clean data set? That's so important. Whereas now you look at unused substitution, ever since TEFTA changed the law, right? And we talked about that earlier. Substitution, you're matching on a 8-digit tariff code basis. Tariff code in, tariff code out. A little bit cleaner, a little bit more organized, a little bit more you're able to capture that data within the entry process. So those are just a few of the nuances that as examples that can complicate or make things a little bit more simplified.
Right. Yeah. So I can see it's really quite complex, and I'm going to assume that Excel spreadsheets are not going to cut it here.
Well, ironically, a lot of people do pass us data in Excel.
Oh,
You could pass us data in Excel. We could create EDI feeds. We're not so concerned about how the data is coming to us, as long as it's in a workable format and we can bring it into our system and do what we do best, right? That's the key. So as long as it's in a workable format and we're not manually keying things in off documentation, we have an IT department that specializes in it, and we could just take raw data dumps as well. It could carry a lot of the data we don't even need, as long as we learn how to sift through it and understand it, and we get to a point. As long as once we agree on a format, we stick to that format. But we're okay with Excel format as long as it has the required data elements.
Great. Okay, that's really good to know. So let's talk about import liquidation dates. How do I go about extending those?
Ah, yeah.
And how long can I extend them for?
Yeah. That's a good question. So how to do it? First thing you got to do, you got to understand and identify all the entries affected by the IEPA tariffs. Get with either a trade council or your broker and have them submit those entries to your local CEE, which is the Center for Excellence and Expertise. It's not guaranteed they will accept it, but that's how you can apply to extend these liquidation dates. And you can extend it for up to 1 year. So think about the folks, let's say that the lower court, the courts, the Supreme Court agrees with the lower court.
Mhm.
Okay. Tariffs go away, everyone's going for a mad dash. That's like in January, assuming that they'd make a decision by the end of the year. You have all these tariffs. If you're importing, say, from China, all these 20% IEPA tariffs that started in February, you're not going to have a lot of time with everybody coming into the fold. If you extended your liquidation date, you give yourself a whole nother year and a half because you have 1 year to file you can file a PSC up to your liquidation date given, which is about 1 year from your entry date. And then after liquidation, it's 180 days to file a protest. So it really gives you a big advantage to deal with all that chaos that's going on.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. It's just sort of going to be able to jump the line a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah,
Um,
well, even if you don't jump the line, you are putting yourself in a position where you don't have to do a mad dash to get this done. You
got
can
it.
do it the right
Okay.
way. Yeah,
So it's really about being prepared and
that's
having
right.
all ducks in a row. So
Mhm.
if the Supreme Court does rule to overturn the IEPA tariffs, does Jem Rogers have processes in place to file PSCs or protests quickly, or do you only
This
handle
this
drawback?
moment today,
Mm,
it would be a very much a challenge. We started hiring before Trump was elected because he was running his campaign on tariffs. We started hiring and Trump, well, we moved several people from import operations into drawback. So it takes about a year to train them. That's how we prepare for this increased duty drawback. We're doing the same thing with the post summary correction pending PSCs that we just hired 4 more compliance people, bringing on staff and training them. And hopefully by the time, if this court case goes that direction, we will be ready to support not only our customers, but other customers that brokers can't.
right, great. That's good to know.
Got to
Uh,
prepare now.
yeah. Well, speaking of preparation, how should a company prepare internally? Who needs to be involved, and what data must be gathered first?
I would say for a company to prepare internally, it all comes, we have a saying around here, drawback is all about the data, right? So obviously equally as important, and the backbone of a drawback program is your documentation. So you have to have good record keeping. But preparing internally really gets you to a point by just understanding the whole concept of drawback and where your eligibility is and making sure you can support it from a data perspective. As far as who needs to be involved, it depends on the organization. The bigger the organization tend to have more resources. But we work with a lot of mid-sized companies who don't have resources, and usually drawback is one of those things that gets thrown on top of somebody on top of their regular job, right? So we have to become a big support system for them, guide them through, and they really do need to champion it internally. I think IT is so important. Somebody who understands the data that we need, right? And then the people on the logistics side or the compliance side that really can make sure that when we need something or if customs is requesting documentation, we can grab that information quickly. Or if we have turnbacks in the data, what's going on with that? How can we work through that? So the drawback program can only go so far. It's a true partnership between the customer and your drawback provider.
Right, right. Wow. So it's really important to have that internal buy-in.
We
very
haven't had
strongly
one, I
clear.
haven't seen one successful drawback program with a customer that is silent in the background.
Right, right. Okay, so you can't just throw it over the fence
Can't
and
just
go,
throw it
"Hey,
over the fence and hope it
you guys
works.
deal with this." Right.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, if we have all the data and we can do a lot, but
Right.
you still need that constant communication and partnership.
Yeah, right. It's not a
Yeah.
one and done
No,
kind of
no.
it,
There will be work to be done on both sides. Anyone who tells you differently is not being truthful. They're not being truthful.
fair enough. So what do you see as the biggest opportunity in duty drawback over, say, the next 5 years?
Oh, historically, tariffs have been are easier to implement tariffs than to take them away. I think you saw that with Trump's first administration, where the other administration who came in, when the Biden administration came in and they were running, the tariffs are terrible. We got to get rid of them. Biden came in, he didn't get rid of them. He kept them. He actually added to them.
Yeah,
So I think when you look at the biggest thing here is, regardless of the Supreme Court, I think Trump will find another way to implement tariffs. So I think tariffs are going to be part of our equation for some time. It's going to take, because once the government starts to realize the amount of money that they have coming in, the government likes to spend our money, I think. I mean, that's just kind of my personal opinion. So it's hard for them to just unplug from that. And the economy has a way to figure out how to balance itself out and continue to move forward with the tariffs in place. So I think tariffs are here. And I think drawback, originally with this administration, they were looking at drawback as a refund, and they're thinking, well, should we be looking at this as a negative? But when you again go back to the spirit of the law, it goes into promoting manufacturing and international sales. And that's what a lot of this administration is saying, that they're putting these tariffs in place. So they're kind of changing their tune on drawback a little bit. So I think drawback's here to stay. And I think as we continue in the future, at least over the next 10 years, you're going to see more and more tariffs come into the market.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, and as you said, it's your money. Don't leave it on the table.
If you're exporting it, you have to be looking at it, because the days of duty free are over.
Yeah, yeah, that seems pretty clear. All right. Well, I think we're going to move into our Q&A session here because I want to
Sure.
hear from the audience. So we're going to bring you, the audience, into this discussion, and we invite you to submit your questions if you haven't already, using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll not be using people's titles or company names, so feel free to ask anything you like. And if you don't see your question answered during the webinar, please be assured the team from JM Rogers will reach out to you offline. So let's get going with these questions. Okay, this is a good one, because I think there's a lot of people here today who I suspect have had nothing to do with duty drawback in the past and are curious about it. So if you're an importer who's new to drawback, what's the first question you should be asking your broker or provider?
If I'm an importer new to drawback, well, first question is, am I exporting my product or selling to somebody who may be exporting my product, right? Because drawback is always attached to an export. Without the export, there is no drawback. Unless I'm destroying product, then there could be potential for drawback. So that's first thing, right? And once you understand that you have an export, then you got to, again, hate to be repetitive here, but we got to dive in and understand the type of drawback you qualify for, because and where you're exporting, and understand that supply chain, so we can understand the type of drawback you fall under, because that's going to lead to what data is required. And then we can help you build that internal process and understand if it's worth it and if you can support it. If you can't support it, how you can support it moving forward.
Right. Do you want to give us an example? I mean, you're talking about how there are different kinds of drawbacks. Could you just give us a couple of quick examples?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before in the presentation, I think a good majority of our customers fall under that big three. So
Hmm.
unused direct identification is a big one. Why? Why do we use unused direct ID if we have to match at a product level? I always tell people we only use unused direct ID if we're forced to. When are we forced to? In the law, we have to do direct identification drawback on exports going to Canada and Mexico, which is about 55% of our total export volume as a country. We have to do direct ID. So we can't do substitution, unfortunately. I wish we could.
Mm.
When NAFTA came into effect, that was a big change in the law that really hurt what we were doing. Okay. So you have to look at that. Or conversely, if I'm importing products parts, components, raw materials into the US, I manufacture and I export to Canada and Mexico. Now there's other rules that are attached to the drawback that could devalue the program. It's called lesser of the two. So I'm only eligible for the lesser of the two duties paid between the US duty and the duty on the finished product, the Canadian duty or the Mexican duty. Oftentimes that's zero because of USMCA law, because of the free trade agreement. So that devalues programs. So we need to understand those little nuances to your supply chain and figure out why you have to do it according to the letter of the law. You might be importing same condition product and exporting to non-USMCA. A lot of people will jump to the gun and say, oh, that should be substitution. Yes, it could be, unless your tariff codes, when you classify them in the tariff book, fall under other, which we call the basket provision. Customs forces us to do direct ID for those. So those are the little things that we have to kind of understand in your supply chain. And then once we can do that, we can show you the data, because there's different data elements and sets for all those drawbacks. But those are really the big three: unused direct ID, substitution, and then manufacturing substitution.
Right. Wow. It's incredibly complex. Do you think is it deliberately complex so that people won't get their money back from the government? What do you think?
It could be. You know what? I actually, doing this 20 years, I never thought about it that way. But yeah, I think maybe you might be right, which, it must not be a bad thing for us as a provider, I guess,
Right.
Fortunately, I always tell people I know drawback well enough to be dangerous. I leave that to the experts because I don't do the claims internally.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
We have a very strong team here. And there's a lot of good drawback providers in the country.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
So
not a lot of them, but there's good ones.
Right. Fantastic. So here's a question that came in. Is it better to wait for the Supreme Court decision before investing in drawback, or to build a program now and hedge for both outcomes?
I mean, I kind of touched on this earlier. I think it's a good question. I think it's a business decision, obviously, but I think it's best to act versus react, right? I think you extend the liquidation dates because that's going to protect you in case Trump loses, okay? And then that's your step one. And then if you have drawback potential, implement drawback. Go back as far as you can or start cleaning it up, because all of that is going to allow you to lengthen your window and get the money back that is owed to you, whether it's through a drawback program or post-summary correction or protest. Any good drawback provider is going to be able to give you the claim and all the entries that were decremented off that bank and say, you can't file post-summary corrections on these. We already claimed drawback. So there's a compliant way to do it.
Great, actually. So, and that leads me on to another question that came in. You were talking about the window. How far back can companies realistically expect to go in recovering duties, and what determines that?
Well, the regulations determine it. But prior to TEFTA, it used to be 3 years from an export date, but now under the new law, since 2018, I think, or 2019 when it went into effect, you can go back. Today's date is September 25th. You can file a claim today, and that can consist of imports that go back 5 years, as long as you're claiming against exports that took place thereafter. So it's about a 5-year window, depending on an inventory turn, and the type of drawback that you're dealing with. So you can go back 5 years. How realistic is it? Well, that's going to depend on how good your data was back then and your record retention.
Right. But I mean, that could be a lot of money as well.
Oh yeah. I was just speaking to somebody who emailed me this morning for a quote, and they identified a $1 or $2.6 million cleanup over a 4-year period, and that, that was over there 4 years, and then moving forward the last few years it's going to go way up because of the reciprocal tariffs.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. So we're really talking real money here.
Yeah.
So where do you see companies most often underestimate the level of effort needed to support drawback? What's the Achilles heel in this process? I think, you're saying data collection, but other things as well, maybe?
I think people may not realize how difficult drawback is until they get into it, right? And the amount of work that it takes to support a drawback program. So I would say that, you know, the lack of knowledge that people have about their own internal, you got to have everything right on the front end from a compliance perspective. If you're not doing things the correct way at the entry level and you don't have good regulatory compliance, it could make drawback a little bit of a slippery slope down the road. Because if you're claiming on entries that weren't done correctly in the first place, that is where you put yourself maybe in harm's way.
Right, right.
So
Wow.
compliance is a big part.
Yeah, yeah, quite a lot at stake there. This is all fantastic, but we're running out the clock, I'm afraid. But we have time for one final question, and that is this. Andrew, for importers and exporters listening today, what is the one action step they should take immediately after this webinar to protect themselves and maximize recovery, no matter how the Supreme Court rules?
Yeah. Good question. Step one, look to extend your liquidation dates. Contact your broker, get a list of all the entries affected by the IEEPA tariffs, and then try to file an extension on your liquidation dates with your local CEE. You might not get the extension, but that would be step one. It's a protection step. Shouldn't cost you a lot of money to do it either. Step two, if you're exporting, start exploring drawback and consult with the drawback specialist, because this is a great way to hedge your bet on that if you qualify. And then you can figure out and make decisions. You're giving yourself time. These two steps will help you, again, hedge your bet and start to act versus reacting. In this industry, how often are we reacting to stuff coming at us? It happens all the time. We do it as brokers, importers do it. Everyone's reacting, and then they finally get done. They take a deep breath. Act now, don't wait.
Wonderful. Act now, don't wait. That's a
right.
pretty clear message. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you, Andrew. And then a special thanks to you, the audience, for participating. I think we've learned a lot today about how we can find a silver lining in terms of duty drawbacks in this start to these storm clouds of tariff uncertainty. We had a lot of questions today, and we'll be answering the ones that we didn't get to with you offline. Those of you who registered for this webinar will receive an email later with a link to view this webinar on demand, which you can share with anyone. There will also be contact information for J.M. Rogers, of course. As you can see on your screen, J.M. Rogers is making a fantastic offer for webinar attendees of a complimentary consult, free duty drawback analysis. That sounds like a very compelling proposition. And now you should see a QR code that leads to more information and Andrew's Calendly, so that you can make an appointment with him for that free consult if you want. And there'll also be links to a Drawback 101 ebook, and a white paper about duty drawbacks. So there's a lot to explore there. Thank you so much for your participation. Stay safe, stay happy, and enjoy the rest of your day.